And Jake Sherman is here to give us the reality check on Congress, whether they will go along with these ideas. Besides the two single things that might actually help the economy, well, those are the two things that the president doesn't appear to want to do. Back off the Fed is one of them, maintain its independence, and the other is back off tariffs. The Supreme Court might do that for him tomorrow, might say those tariffs are unconstitutional, but all indications so far are that the president will try to use some other authority to maintain those tariffs, or at least some of them. There's so much to get to, and we have a great panel here. Joining us, co-host of the Weekend Primetime on MSNow and economics editor for The Bulwark, Catherine Rampell. Punchbowl News co-founder and MSNow political contributor Jake Sherman, and former Ohio governor and MSNow political analyst John Kasich. All right, Catherine, let's start small. These new proposals the president's made, will they work?
Well, many of them he can't actually legally do. So, for example, his promise to cap interest rates on credit cards, not something he has the legal authority to do. Even if he could convince Congress to do it, the agency that would likely enforce such a cap, the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Trump is actively trying to shut down. In fact, there is a major lawsuit that has been ongoing for a while because he has been trying to shut it down. Some of the other proposals that you mentioned, things like banning institutional investors from buying single-family homes, that is a vanishingly small portion of the real estate market. I know it's everybody's favorite boogeyman, seemingly on both the left and the right, but institutional investors own very, very few homes. The ones that they do own, of course, they generally rent out. They don't just buy them to burn them down. The real problem, the real reason why housing is so expensive is that we don't build enough in this country, which is something that, candidly, presidents from both parties don't have a lot of control over. But either way, this is not going to resolve anything. These are, fig leaves. He's trying to sort of gesture at the idea that he's going to make people's lives better because he has failed to deliver thus far on bringing prices down. And in fact, he has instead brought prices up through some of the means that you mentioned, including tariffs. But these will not really do anything if he even ever got the legal authority to implement them.
Yeah, well, let's talk about one of the other things, or the first thing that we mentioned, the credit card caps. He would need Congress's approval on that. And he had an interesting call, Jake, or I assume it's an interesting call. The fact that he called her period is interesting, with Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is for this. Is that something that a majority in the Senate and a majority in the House would support?
No, no, absolutely not. Mike Johnson talked about this morning in his weekly news conference, and he said, I'm going to paraphrase here, but this is the gist of what he said. He said, Trump is an ideas guy, so he says what's on his mind, and then we try to take the ball from there. But what Johnson also said is this would be a long process to get consensus on an item like this. And Johnson brought up the fact that credit card companies, if they were forced to cap their rates, their interest rates, would probably lend less, meaning people wouldn't be able to accrue as much debt under that law, under that proposal, under that policy than they do now. That is a suboptimal outcome for people who live on revolving debt, on revolving charge cards, which is a lot of people use revolving charge cards. This is not something that the president, to my knowledge, and I think I would have heard about this, put a lot of time or thought into up here. I don't know how much time he put into in his own head coming out for this, but he did not work the room up here. And I'm not even convinced, I don't know one way or another, if he knew that Congress had to be involved. Now, he's also now getting involved, Katie, in another big credit card battle, which has flown under the radar nationally, but is gigantic up here on Capitol Hill, the Credit Card Competition Act, which is a bipartisan bill from Dick Durbin and Roger Marshall, Dick Durbin of Illinois, Roger Marshall of Kansas, which effectively forces credit cards to use more than one processing system. It is a convoluted to talk about right now policy that the credit card industry has, that many stakeholders in the financial services space have been against for a long time. And the White House tells me that they're going to put a lot of might behind that bill. The basic thing that Catherine hit on, and it's absolutely right, is the president is trying to show progress on bringing costs down the actual outcome might be a little bit different than that. And he will need Congress, an institution, by the way, Katie, in which he has an extraordinarily narrow margin in the House of Representatives and narrowing because he has a ton of absences on the Republican side all the time, and a Senate in which, and Cory Booker talked about this, in which Democrats are not really interested in a ton of cooperation.